Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about leading remote teams, online collaboration, and working in distributed organizations. This podcast is brought to you by Virtual Not Distant, where we help managers and teams transition to an office-optional approach. Find out everything we do over at virtualnotdistant.com and check out our show notes and pictures of our lovely guests over on the podcast page. It's great to have you here, listeners. Let's get on with the show. Hello and welcome to episode 234 of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we are going to have a look at what's going on in the world of the knowledge worker and also in the world of virtual not distant. And then we'll talk about flexible communication in remote teams. I'm Pilar Orti, and with me today is co-host Maya Middlemiss. Hello, Maya.
Hello, Pilar. Hello, everybody.
And we might hear, because I already heard it in the beginning, the nice birds behind you today, Maya. So, hello, birds.
Yeah, everybody's welcome. I'm in a new house, a new home office that's slightly chaotic, but at least there's birds on outside, so that will cover up the noise of any builders crashing around in the background.
As if on cue. So today is the 6th of May 2020, which is important in the context, but also because this is a What's Going On episode. So new listeners, welcome to the show. We hope you'll stay for a few episodes because our show is quite diverse. So we hope that there's a show for everyone. And we've got lots of formats. And regular listeners, if you enjoy our company, well, now you can buy us coffee. So we have set up, we'll see how this works. I thought it'd be quite nice just as some kind of point of contact also with listeners, as of course to get a coffee. That's always nice. Mm-hmm. We have set up a page on ko-fi.com, which is ko-fi.com/virtual not distant. And of course, Maya will gracefully put the link in the show notes as always. And all we say is if you enjoy the show and you want to buy Maya and I a coffee, great. I have decided not to put one in the episodes where there are guests, because then I would feel like we have to get the coffee to the guests also. And it can be a bit of a logistical nightmare. But you're very welcome to do that anyway. If you have, whatever. If you want to support us with coffee, with virtual coffee, then that is the place to do it. Meanwhile, today's show, we're going to look at what's going on. So we'll look at some articles that have caught our eye over the last few weeks. And we will then look at what's going on at Virtual Not Distant, so some of the stuff that's happened in the company or with listeners, etc. And then we're going to do a section on flexible communication, mainly asynchronous communication. So depending on when you're listening to this and why you're listening to this, you can choose where you start and stop. The beauty of podcasting. So Maya, shall we just go straight into it?
Yes, let's see what's going on.
Let's start then with how about this I suppose the most timely article. However, I think it's so suitable and so relevant to whenever anyone is listening to this. And this is an article in Workplacesless in their blog. And it was, it was published on, but I can't see a publishing date, but it was sometime in April 2020. Let me know if you see it, Maya.
Yeah, it's definitely current.
Yes. And the title is What Happens to HR When Everyone is Suddenly Remote? And it looks mainly at that. It focuses on human resource departments in organizations, how they are supporting employees, what they might be going through, and and I just thought it was interesting from that point of view, because we haven't. It's not a point of view that's been at the front of mind. And I've also got a couple of things to pull out. But Maya, do you want to say anything that you thought was worth saying, or shall I start?
I think it's a really interesting perspective, and I agree. It's not one that we've kind of really. It's not one we've looked at in the podcast before. It's not one that I've given a great deal of thought to. It describes the HR professional as being involved in emotional labour, and that's quite an interesting phrase. That a lot of what they do deal with on a day to day is people's emotional responses to what's going on in the workplace, and of course they typically do that face to face, over real coffee rather than virtual, and it must completely change that role and how those conversations take place. And I wonder, as this article speculates, how well equipped HR professionals are for dealing with all that added stress that people are going through right now. It's all going to end up on them.
Because it's not just change, because of course in any kind of change they're gonna be there and they're gonna have to be at the front of, like you say, supporting people. There's also, of course, all the logistics of looking after people in a different scenario. And like you say, this is maybe something that hasn't been done at a distance before. And if already we've seen that some HR procedures and practices are not in line, even when companies are introducing remote work in a deliberate way, then now we can imagine and all the uncertainty. So I think this is very appropriate for now, of course, but I think also for looking ahead. And the reason why I wanted to bring it into the show was they mentioned loneliness. And loneliness as something that might be happening in the organization, but also that they might be going through. And of course, we have a series of 7 episodes with ShieldGEO on connection and disconnection in remote teams. And I was looking through some of the show notes, thank you, Maya, of those episodes. And one thing stood out. I think it was Tim Burgess who mentioned this, about the fact that your role sometimes can cause loneliness. So loneliness is not just about being physically apart from people. There's so much more to it. And reading through this article, I thought, even in a transition that's been deliberate, thought through and stuff, with everything that's going on around, with all the problems with IT that people will have, whether it's access or being able to use it or understanding why they have to use it, I think, yes, being in an HR role can lead to that feeling of disconnection too. So yeah, I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, definitely. There's an awful lot about the role that involves very confidential conversations, and that's going to create loneliness even if you're in a co-located team, and to be dealing with all those other people's emotions but not able to sort of decompress that with your colleagues around you in your normal department must be a great deal harder.
Yeah. So regarding transition, business leaders especially pay attention to that. Hopefully HR at the front of that transition too. And the other thing I picked up on, which I think is evergreen, is this concept this idea and this fact that mainly when we shift to remote work, the problem is not that we work less, that we put less hours in. The problem, as we know, is that it's very easy to put more hours in. And I really like that was also mentioned and highlighted in the article, that is an issue. Good. So anything else you want to say about that article, or shall we move on to the broader topic?
Yeah, let's move on to the next one. But there's lots in this one, and I might tweet this one separately, actually, because I think anybody working in HR ought to read this.
Yeah, excellent. Good. So our Twitter handle is virtual teamwork with a 0 instead of an O if you want to follow us on Twitter. And indeed, virtualnotdistant.com for all your long-form comments, and signing up to the newsletter where we have lots of recommended reading. So if you do enjoy reading through articles and just catching up over coffee with some of the stuff that's going on, that's a good thing for you. We only do it once a month. Right. So there's a collection of articles, and this must come as no surprise to anyone, about what will the physical workplace of the future look like after COVID-19. And there's a few articles that cover this, and I think it's a really interesting conversation because, it brings up the bigger conversation around what is the office for, and getting companies, organizations, and even employees to start thinking about, what do I get from being there? And that's, for me, Maya, that's enough. It doesn't matter if it's not the things that we would love to hear, but just that people stop and think, what is the office for? Yes. I think it's a great question.
It is. Being away from anything makes you reflect on what it means to you, I guess. And for a lot of people, this is their first experience of being away from the office for a prolonged period. And it's not one they chose. So it is a chance to really think about that and think about what it's going to feel like to go back into that space and what we want to build there. And also just how people feel about their current situation of isolation. I think there was some interesting research mentioned on the news at the weekend that a lot of people are quite fearful about coming out of isolation, and the idea of going back to a workplace might feel quite threatening if they don't have a choice about that either. So yeah, it'd be very interesting to see what the long-term changes are.
Yeah, and listeners, do get in touch with us if you have any examples of this, because of course the studies and the articles are great, but the anecdotes of that personal experience can really feed us. So feel free to get in touch. So the first article I found, it's called Social Distancing in the Workplace, the New Norm. And it's in the Buro Happold blog, which I don't know how I came across this. Probably someone shared it on LinkedIn. Actually, yeah, I'm sure someone shared it on LinkedIn. And they're a company doing workplace analytics. So I found this so interesting that they've mapped the movement of people, and you can see the animation in the blog post. They've mapped the movement of people in an open office, and then of course they've mapped how this would work if you were considering how far people are supposed to be from each other, the 2 meters. And well, social distancing is practically impossible. They do put a number on it, which go back to my Trello. Yes, so so I'll just touch on that, and then we can go back onto the more exciting stuff. They're saying that they're suggesting that if you get to 40% occupancy in an office workplace, in an open plan office like that one, then you need to start thinking about redesign. So up to around 40%, you probably can maintain those distances without doing much, but afterwards you need some redesign.
Yeah, I think it's really good to see this kind of analysis coming out now. And it does show a looking forward. You know, a few weeks ago, everybody was talking and writing about what it means to go remote overnight. Now there's a shift in perspective to looking at, okay, how do we come out of this and what do we change? And it's clear that technology is going to be really, really important in driving this idea of heat maps and distancing and being able to track that. And I don't know, I love this animation where we've got these circles around us to try and show whether we have that clearance or not is a really good way of visualizing it. So I don't know if we're going to have that in some kind of app or some kind of heat map of the building. Maybe when you emerge from a lift or something, it'll be able to say, don't go to that area over there, there's already too many people. If you want a clear empty desk, then head to this floor or something like that. Be just really interesting to see how it manifests.
And on top of that, so following on from that, and something that I was also wondering when I was reading the article is, I was wondering about the stress that having to manage our movement in the office can bring. Because one of the good things about going to another workspace is that you have more space than, say, at home or even in a co-working space, that you can move around, move to see people, move to do different kinds of stuff. And part of that, and how that is a container for spontaneity. You know, we talk about planned spontaneity in the online world. In the physical office, it's easy to be spontaneous, so we don't have to plan it as much. And part of that spontaneity that we don't get in the online world is our interaction in the same space as other people, and using the space for spontaneity. And now spontaneity is going to be strangled.
Completely. And I think one of the things, certainly, and I don't know whether this will be updated by the time we release this next week, but at the moment, a lot of businesses are saying that the statutory guidance they're getting is too woolly, that they're not being told how and when things will be safe. And it seems to me that a lot is going to be left to employers to decide how many people they can bring back into the space, what's essential, who needs to come in, and so on. So they're not necessarily going to get guidance, and that puts a lot of responsibility. Like we were talking about the stress HR people feel.
Yeah.
You know, businesses are going to have to decide and accept liability for keeping their workers safe when they come back to the office, and that's huge. That's going to create stress for everybody.
Yeah, and that's something that we weren't expecting, I imagine. And yes, and I think that uncertainty it's just going to carry on for a while because governments don't know. So yeah, that's a really important point. So one other thing before I ask you to tell us about this piece that you have, which actually talks about the tech and how to use how the use of tech can facilitate this transition, because that's another transition. I find it really interesting that people think, oh, we'll go back to the office, as if that is not another bit of change that we're going to have to go through. So something I was listening, actually, it was to The Naked Scientist, which is a science show, podcast, and they were talking about what office optional might look like in the future. And someone said, maximize contact when it needs to happen and minimize contact when it doesn't, which is, I think, is really good. It's a really good guideline for when do we want to be together in real time, when do we want to be together in the same space, and just thinking about our interactions so that having contact and meeting wherever we're meeting with each other is not the default, but actually we really think about it. And when we do it, we maximize it. And we maximize the time and maybe even who we're with. So I thought I thought I'd share that. It's
quite a nice alignment with what we talk about, very specific communication in remote, and that you with a bit of intentionality behind it, you can have richer and deeper conversations. And maybe we'll move to doing that in the physical workspace as well, hopefully without losing that spontaneity that we do enjoy when we see people face to face.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, so shall we move on to the article that you shared? You more than shared, because you wrote it, didn't you?
Yeah. This is an article that I wrote in association with Crestron, who make the kind of technology people use in office and meeting rooms, and they're starting to look ahead to what their clients are going to be asking them for as we move back to work. And it's really interesting because obviously people aren't going to be going back to work in the same way. So they're starting to look at all sorts of things like how you use spaces in a much lower density way. And whether we're going to have meeting rooms in the same way. It might be a case that a meeting room that was designed for 8 people now becomes one for 4 people, because you cannot safely use that room with the same number of people in it. So that changes the audiovisual requirements. For example, you might have people sitting a lot further away from each other than the space was originally designed for. The camera pickup might have to be altered. It might be something like having a more central camera rather than one on the wall that's designed to face people looking in a certain direction. And even the way that those rooms are controlled and interacted with. It's funny because the last few years, a great deal of investment has gone into touch-based technology, touchpads to get into rooms and things like that. No one is going to want to touch anything for a long time to come. We're going to have this period which is going to be probably about a year before we realistically have any kind of either a vaccine or reliable treatment, where we're still going to have to interact with people. So all that touch stuff is going to go. So we're not going to do that. So what are we going to do instead? Maybe it'll be different biometrics like iris scanning and things like that, which happen in a touch-free way. Voice control is clearly going to be very important, because that's interesting. Everybody's been at home where voice control technology is becoming more and more acceptable. I won't say the name of the lady from Amazon in case we start triggering things in listeners' homes, but people are getting very, very comfortable with interacting with that at home. So maybe when they come back to work, certainly Microsoft are looking at voice skills a lot, and I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot of that coming into meeting technology, because you don't have to touch anything. And it can also be used biometrically to identify people as well through voice print. So that would be one to look out for. And I think the other thing that the guys from Crestron were saying is there's going to be a lot more of people doing more things with their own devices, such as controlling meeting room technology through their own phone or their own tablet or whatever, because it's not a case of bringing your own device to do work on. We're all very confident with that, but bringing your own device to effectively control spaces and the environment around you. So with the idea that you only touch your own thing, you don't have to interact physically with any of the rest of the tech.
I think this is very exciting from hearing you talk about it. It's exciting from the point of view of using technology in a way that's enabling us to interact with the workspace in a way that is enabling us to be comfortable with it also. It's almost like instead of saying, I mean, people have been made to, but, let's put the sudden rush to remote to one side. Instead of saying we have to interact with technology because we're not in our usual workspace, this actually means we're in a surrounding that is more or less familiar, because it's not going to be what we're used to for a while. And we're having to use technology already in our day-to-day, and we're going to start to be a bit more comfortable with it, which means that when we do have the option to transition and go away, that interaction with the tech and that very intimate interaction with the tech is not going to be a barrier, or at least not such a big one. And of course, the voice thing, again, the fact that we interact with technology not just with our fingers typing, and now not just with our video and whole self, but actually that the voice also carries some weight. I think that is very exciting also.
It's going to change so many things that we've taken for granted about how we kind of recognize each other and interact with things. I was even in the supermarket the other day. Somebody phoned me and I brought my phone out of my bag, and my phone didn't recognize me because I had a mask on.
Oh, wow.
So I had to pull my mask down to use the face recognition. And then I thought, well, I could actually have entered my code, but I'm so used to just lifting my phone and having that kind of biometrics. We expect that to happen. We're going to be part of this piece of bringing in the technology we use to recognize the way that we're going to interact with people in the workplace or in public and all sorts of different ways. But the technology is getting there. There's an awful lot clearly going on behind the scenes to make that ready for us, I think. We'll see lots of changes.
Excellent. So listeners, again, if this is something that you are seeing, that you're thinking about, please share your thoughts with us. Sometimes lots of listeners share this stuff on LinkedIn, actually. So we are on LinkedIn, and we are also on our website, virtualnotdistant.com. And talking of LinkedIn, I just like to put to link, and people can read it if they want, to link to an article that I actually wrote 4 years ago, March 27th, 2016, which is called Sharing Office Space Across Organizations, the Future of Co-working. And I thought I'd just bring it back because this is an opportunity to redesign the workspace. And I just thought if companies could think about their workspaces more holistically, and think we don't have to have a building per organization or even a floor per organization. I know there's always security stuff and all that stuff, and you don't want to be hooking up with your competitors. But if you created a set of offices which are more like a co-working space where like 4 organizations come together, the amount of cross-pollination of ideas, the networking, the expansion of people's minds. Well, now is the time, people.
Definitely. And if that's what people are missing about the workspace, that kind of stimulation and creative feedback, then that's a really good opportunity to think about what you need, what you do miss. And it might be more of an incubator style kind of interaction with people who give you that creative inspiration, which isn't necessarily the people doing the same job as you in the same company in the same way.
Yeah. Excellent. So anyway, if you have any influence over where you end up, maybe, hopefully. Let me just have a look at, actually, maybe now is a good time. Global Workplace Analytics. Was this your contribution, Maya? Or is this something that I placed and now I've forgotten why?
I think we found this a couple of weeks ago. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, I think I put this in our Trello before moving. And for me, that's it's a bit like a sort of geological watershed of boxes and packets. So.
Okay. Well, let me just guide listeners through the title and stuff. So it's from Workplace Analytics, and it's in their news releases page. And so it won't be the one on the 4th of May then?
No, this is updated. That's why I'm looking at it thinking, I don't remember this at all.
So maybe the one from the 1st of April 2020?
Yeah, I think it could have been that. I remember grabbing it because I thought, yes, some actual research.
Okay, let me read the title for listeners then. So it says, you're right, now this is really out of date, just with a month. So survey to reveal who's working from home during COVID-19. what's working, what isn't, and how this will impact the future of work. So do you remember, Maya?
Yeah, well, what
you
they've
took
actually
from this?
updated is the results of the survey. Just
Oh,
looking
okay.
at it, we can sort of back up to the top of the page. They actually have this data now. So I think, I remember grabbing the link because we were so much talking about speculation and anecdote of what's going to happen and what do people think and will it change the way people want to work, and somebody is actually attempting to analyse that. So great, we need to talk about this. And according to this research, which was released this week.
This week? No, it was released yesterday, because when I came in here yesterday morning, it wasn't up.
Yeah. the release is, the 4th of May. So 77% of workforce wants to work from home after COVID-19. Largest post-COVID survey to date indicates workers are more productive and happier at home. So who did they actually talk to? It's a very sweeping statement. I'm trying to find some actual data behind the survey, but clearly this is, before I can find that, and we'll put that into the show notes. Yeah. They're talking about a very positive swing towards people wanting to work from home, which I would suggest has a lot more nuance going on behind it. And a third of their survey respondents said they worked from home at least weekly before COVID-19. So that suggests there's definitely a bias to knowledge workers here.
I'm sure.
Yeah. For over half of employees, 55%, this was a new experience. Having had a taste, even under less than ideal conditions, employees are saying they want more. The genie is out of the bottle and it's not going back in, says Kate Lister, president of Global Workplace Analytics. So interesting.
Yeah, and something that's related to what we've been talking about, the office space and the design of that. This says the majority of employees, 60%, would be willing to give up their assigned desk at the office in exchange for the opportunity to work from home some or all of the time. And then Kamuri says this preference demonstrates the importance of flexibility in the overall employee value proposition. So, hey, flexibility, we're not only talking location, people, and the role that working from home can play for both employees and the creation of future workplaces that are agile and efficient. So that's interesting data for redesigning the workspace.
Definitely. And that is interesting about giving up their assigned desks, because of everything we were just talking about sort of hygiene and knowing who's been, the whole idea of hot desking could feel a little bit kind of at the moment. So the fact is that people would actually trade that for having that increased flexibility and being able to, maybe it's that sense of control of being able to work as you choose and as suits what you're going to be doing. So really, really interesting.
Yeah. There's a note here. The survey was supported through distribution to its members by industry associations around the world, including Workplace Evolutionaries, which is a community within the 25,000-member International Facilities Management Association focused on the future of work. So, I think you're probably getting knowledge workers, as you were saying.
Yeah, but they're going to be the ones who control what's happening in a lot of big offices. So, yes, we're going to have to see if they continue to update this. So, great. Yeah.
Good. So this is getting a bit samey in a theme, but maybe just see so, for example, Tim Burgess in Virtual Team Talk, he shared an article on Tata, the engineering consultancy. I think that's right. I think Tata Consultancy Services, an IT service firm. Yeah, it's India's largest one. It's only small. So they are saying, okay, we are going to permanently have some people working from home. We are adopting this.
Yes, and this is coming from the top as well. This is about what management believe is necessary. So we've got the research that we just talked about, what people want, what team members want. But then if we're starting to actually convince leadership as well that people don't need to come to work, then that's a very powerful catalyst for change.
Yeah, really amazing. So this is in Business Today on the 30th of April, 2020. Post-COVID, 75% of 4.5 lakh TCS employees to permanently work from home by 2025, from 20%. So they've gone from 20% to 75%. Is there anything specific that stood out? I've got a couple of things, but...
I think it was very interesting to get a perspective from another part of the world, actually, and I think probably India... and I'm not completely up to date on this, but I suspect India is behind the curve in terms of the progression of the pandemic and where things are at compared to Europe. So they're still very, very much in the thick of it, and maybe less looking forward to unlocking. And so it's very interesting that this firm in particular are definitely looking ahead in that way. Very encouraging.
I picked up from it that there's also a mention of the need to change how we work. So again, this is not, what was I doing? I think I was replying to someone who was writing an article on what the new office space might look like. And I was saying that this is, we can't just be thinking about the physical, how we're working physically and giving more options without also thinking about how we are working. This is the problem when companies adopt remote work and an office optional approach, and they only think of location and not about how are we interacting and the less hierarchical approaches. So I am glad that was picked up, the opportunity of being more distributed and therefore more agile and resilient.
Yeah, so very interesting. It's the business case for it in terms of business continuity. I think probably what this crisis has done is massively highlighted the difference between companies that were kind of ready to go and make this transition and those that really weren't. It was like your conversation with Bry from Core last week about the companies that were already cloud-enabled, maybe working very similarly to those who were very dependent on legacy IT, and it was so much less easy to just go home. And some of these places might look similar on the surface, but it's how your ability to respond to something like this has been tested like never before, and there'll be so many lessons coming out of that.
And I really like that there's, I don't know if this was my interpretation or an implication, that less hierarchy gives you more resilience because people can actually get on with what they need to be doing. So,
I think that's distributed networks generally. There's this sense that, things don't have to route, whether it's decisions or resources or anything else. The more flexible you are, the more networked you are, instead of having to go through a pyramid. Command and control, then that's more resilient.
Exactly. And the other thing I picked up, unfortunately, is that they do mention that there might be a problem with home office spaces. You're saying, okay, 75% of people can work from home. Yeah, but what does that mean?
Yeah.
And connectivity issues also, which is still an issue everywhere.
Yes, definitely. And, India is so advanced in terms of technology and IT for Asia, because they've led the world in so many different ways, and they'll probably solve this before the rest of us. So it'll be very interesting to watch.
Yeah. So changing tack a bit, changing angle a little bit. So we'll leave the office space and let's look at there was a well-being article. There was something I want to share around well-being, because I think also this is, of course, it's been talked a lot about, and the digital well-being aspect of the change, and also, but in remote work anyway, this fact that suddenly we are having we're doing all our work in screens. As we've mentioned, sometimes we do too many hours, etc. Blah, blah, blah. And Simon Dealey, who is one of our listeners, hello Simon, had a collection of articles, and I had a look, and there's one that I particularly thought was interesting, and it's on the remotify.work site, and it's April 14th, 2020, and it's called 9 Steps to Maintaining Your Work-Life Boundaries. I really like that it's not work-life balance, but boundaries, because thinking about it, I think that's what it is. Because then you put your boundaries where you want them.
Yeah, and they're dynamic and they're not always physical. Yes. I really like this article, actually, talking about sort of the different ways you can define those boundaries. And it's a lot of people are getting very hung up on the fact that they might not have the ideal home workspace. They might not have a door they can close. They might not have a fixed time that they work and so on. But there are lots of other ways you can define your space and maybe put some stakes in the ground and carve out a bit of separation between work and life.
Yeah. And I really like that the article helps you think through what works best for you. It's not really offering things that you could do. It's actually helping you to think through it, because I think in the rush to this suddenly working from home thing, of course, people need it. They just wanted to be told, okay, what's going to work? But I think hopefully now, and as we're more conscious about whether we're going to work from home or not, or understanding that we are going to have to, that we can now start, like with teamwork, that we can start to breathe and go, okay, how do we do this best? What works for me? And I think this article is a nice guide for that.
It really is. There's lots of lovely advice in here, like thinking about sort of places within your home and outside it, or even specific pieces of furniture that mean work. And this is where even things like checking email on your phone or something, it's very easy for that to end up with no boundaries at all. And I would never say you shouldn't check email on your phone. For some people, that might be the very thing they need to do. But I quite like the idea of thinking about, well, maybe I don't do it from this particular chair. So this is where I read a book, or I don't do it from bed or whatever, if that works for you. And I love the idea that boundaries can be very virtual, very personal, and very flexible, but you can perceive them and draw them up where you want to.
Yeah. So Simon sent a note when I asked him for some articles. He said, and this article, the training that I'm working on is a digital mentor. So he's working on a piece on an app. It's a digital mentor that you spend 5 to 10 minutes a day chatting with. It offers sparks of inspiration and signposts information that will be useful for those undergoing a remote work baptism of fire or a more orderly transformation. There's a variant for team members and one for team leaders. And so he's giving us the link to a landing page. And he said it may be that we can give early access to some listeners for free in exchange for feedback. So listeners, grab it while you can. We are recording on the 6th of May, but this will go out next week. So it's quite timely, actually. If you can't find the link or whatever, just find Virtual Not Distant somewhere and we will put you in touch with Simon Deeley, or maybe you can get in touch with him, Deeley on LinkedIn. And then there's another thing there's a couple more things. So this is a very long what's going on section. In addition to this, there's, I picked up something on LinkedIn by someone I don't know. His name is Adam Weber and his company is Amplify. And I really like that he made an announcement about his company. And I'm going to read it, and it's got further implications, I think, than the current COVID. So he said, we announced to the company today that we won't be working Fridays in May. So there's still a lockdown probably. After reviewing our engagement data, it became clear that our employees need rest. Simply encouraging them to, in inverted commas, take a break when they need it isn't enough. By aligning all of our days off, we are allowing our people to truly unplug on their off day. They won't be bothered with Slack, email, and meetings. We gain efficiency by aligning our schedules, and most importantly, we acknowledge the reality of this situation and the impact it is having on our employees. This is a season for bold leadership, and caring for our people today. Caring for our people today is what will allow our purpose to come to life tomorrow. I love that. You see, there is not one way of working away from each other. And it's similar to the conversation that I had in the episode with, I think it was Catherine MacDonald on digital workspaces, where she said that sometimes the flexibility we crave over our schedules causes stress in the team. Because if I can work whenever I want, then when you want to work with me, that causes additional stress. So I really like this.
Definitely. And it's a way of doing it in quite a top-down way that really kind of gives people that permission and that freedom. And, I really respect the fact that they looked at the data and they saw that was what was needed, that, yes, it's all very well to say to people work flexibly, but if they're not, then people do need a bit more direction. It's a bit like a few years ago, this kind of unlimited vacation policies were really popular at lots of tech startups and things like that. And then somebody took a look and realized actually what this is meaning in practice is that people aren't taking holidays. So what we need to do is say, right, here's some lines, we expect you to take X number of days or weeks off a year. And this is the same thing. So Friday, there won't be any emails, there won't be any work going on. I really like the way that they've consciously decided to protect people's space like that.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, that's it for what's going on in the wider world of work, but stuff has also been happening at Virtual Not Distant. So let's move on to that. You can connect with other listeners by sharing your thoughts via our contact form at virtualnotdistant.com. Well, the first thing I'd like to say is hello to Anne-Laure, I think is her name, a listener in Brussels. Hello, LinkedIn. I love it when people who really listen to the show get in touch, because I do get people who say, "Oh, I love the work on the podcast," and they haven't listened to one show. They just want to sell me something.
Yeah.
And I also want to say hello to someone. Her name is Tosca, and her Twitter handle is @Tosca5Oaks. Or 50 acts. I love it. And she, I think she shared some of our stuff. And I love this tweet that she has, which says, having your dedicated workspace for working from home is so important for productivity and quality work, but also for your sanity. Being able to walk away from it helps with setting boundaries. Yet hard to find for many, many people in this world. And there are clear equity angles to this. And this was a retweet of another tweet. Up to 50% of people who work from home are struggling finds a new study in Ireland. 20% work from their bed and half in a converted sitting room or kitchen.
Not great,
so
is that? Yeah.
I think that not just, I mean, this is my main concern all the time with the office optional approach, and especially with the remote work, which usually means working from home, is that what the office gives us is a space to work. And we can't assume that everyone has one.
And it just shows you how many different implications there are for all this flux that the world is in at the moment, because we're looking at one study that says 77% of people want to work from home some of the time. That's great. But then yes. 40% of them are struggling to find a place within their home to do that. So there's going to be so many shifts coming up. I was talking about it to the person who sold us this new house, about how his work is likely to change in Spain, where people are so consumed by apartment living in quite small spaces, and whether there'll be a surge of people rushing to the suburbs to have homes with gardens, but also space that they can work in, and if they've enjoyed working from home, or if they see that they might have to again in the future. It's going to change so many things about how we live, never mind how we work.
That is really interesting. And that, again, well, that's another maybe divide also, inequality for I mean, we've always said this anyway, that this is a double-edged sword, allowing this flexibility, not just for some jobs, but for the people who have those spaces. So please, companies who are thinking of having a more office optional approach, also think of co-working spaces, also think of other spaces that are not people's homes that they might be able to access, or that you can help them to access. This is so important, that remote work does not end up being working from home, because
not every home is suitable for that.
Yeah,
and I've never been more aware of that than in the last few weeks, and never been more grateful for the fact of having a home which is actually designed for the two adults in it to homework, and having the space that goes with that.
And it's also interesting for those people that can choose where they live and the kind of home that they end up in. It's nice to think that they're going to now think of it in a different way, rather than have to be in a specific location. They're now going to find a location and then decide how important is it that we have this space. It's interesting, changing mindset. Yeah, fascinating. So more virtual, not distant news. We've been working with some companies in Spain, which just because of what happened, and of course because I speak the language, I still realize that there is still a culture thing for me, because I am Anglo-Saxon educationally bred and work-wise, but still. And I was working with a company that is part of an international company, so it's about 200. And just the interesting thing with that, I was working with managers, just starting to get them to think about leading a remote team, not just for now, but for the future. Because as I said before on the show, and Simon picked up on it, Simon Deely, some people have taken this opportunity to finally introduce a more flexible way of working. However, of course, we've had the problem of the experience of remote has been to jump on online meetings. So now we're having to fight against that in a way. But within that, there were people, like somebody said in one of the sessions, he said to his colleagues, he said, I've got nothing against you, but I'm not going to be rushing to the office anytime soon. And again, it's something that you were saying before, because you've got distance now, you can assess And they were also starting to think, well, why would I go there? So this is not stuff that were just happening in our heads, listeners. It really, people coming to that realization and asking themselves these questions, I thought it was worth relating back. And the other thing that struck me that's also quite evergreen was the difference between the senior management team, so they act a little bit like a board of directors, and the management and the other employees, is that, of course, senior management, their job is to look ahead. So they're way behind, way ahead in the change curve there. Someone said, I don't know if you remember, Maya, in a conversation we were having with other people, someone said they are in a different change curve even. So this really brought to mind the fact when we're transitioning with all the plans and all the conversations that have been had, usually at a senior level, that we then try to take our people with us. But remember that we are already seeing stuff that they can't even be thinking about.
No, because it's not their job to have to think about.
Exactly.
They need that guidance and direction. So, yeah.
Yeah. So that was interesting and interesting to be working with a different culture. What did happen, which as a practitioner, and I just thought I'd share this. I don't think I've shared this on the podcast before, is that being used to doing any kind of online workshop-y kind of stuff on Zoom, which has breakout rooms, which has a chat, and which has a sharing screen function. I delivered some of these sessions because how I ended up delivering them, they weren't workshops. They were more like a kind of a talk discussion thing, because no breakout rooms. Okay, I can cope with that. No chat. Yeah, because and this is the thing. This was an application that wasn't designed for these kind of meetings, but because of the time frame, we just couldn't do anything else. And it really made me think of the importance. It's like, how long have you been thinking about this? But when you're there, the importance of team dynamics and how the technology we're using restricts or enhances those, and how it manipulates them, or how it can influence them if we don't realize. So every discussion, exercise, everything had to be shaped in a different way, and. Yeah, it was just, I think that was a real, it really brought it home that, hang on, we've got this that hasn't been built for this. And this conversation now I have to be leading it because there's 12 of us. I have to be leading it all the time. There's no chat, therefore no side conversations. The practicality of sharing URLs, I had to bit.ly them.
Right.
Yeah,
I'll read them out.
Yes, and read them out. And so all of that just changed. I was capturing thoughts rather than asking everyone to capture because of the URL and all of this stuff. I was capturing them as if I was capturing them on a flip chart, which I don't like because I don't think they need to go through me. But that was the best way to do them. And actually, it provided a good, nice focus and a nice cohesive feel. So anyway, I just thought I'd share that also. Yeah. And finally, around the Spanish situation, listeners, if any of you, well, if you're listening to this, then if you want to read our stuff, you're probably reading it in English. But if you want to share it with any of your friends, Thinking Remote is now out in Spanish. Yay! So thank you to Priska Doftegard and Ivor Rubio and my mother, I have to say. My mother played a very important part in getting the stuff to sound proper. It's called Planteamientos del Liderazgo a Distancia, Inspiración para Jefes de Equipos Remotos. And Thinking Remote, translated literally, didn't work. So it's now thoughts or considerations of leading at a distance, of distance leadership. So yeah, it was interesting even to have to change the title and change the cover a little bit too.
Very interesting. It's just such an exciting time to see business transformation in Spain and the people thinking about things in new ways. So yeah, it's lovely that the book's available now in Spanish.
There we go. So we'll have it in print out soon, but at the moment you can find it through our website, virtualnotdistant.com/books, where you can also find all our other books, or if not, in any ebook platform. Right. I think that I've got another piece of internal conversation that I had with a friend, but that is part of the next section. So at almost an hour of updates, let's move on to some flexible communication. Right. So, listeners of the show will not be surprised to know that we are going to go on about asynchronous communication and other kind of communication that doesn't involve real-time interaction, because that is what gives remote work its flexibility. Well, that's one of the things. And thinking of this, of course, came mainly because of I have a friend who was transitioning, and she was having real problems introducing that asynchronous communication in her team. And of course, this is a very strange situation because everyone's had to rush to working from home and working away from each other. We hope that transitions are not like this all the time, but the resistance, without judging that resistance, the resistance to changing what is a very organic way of communicating, which is real time, to not. So I thought, Maya, to call this, instead of asynchronous, maybe we can call it flexible communication.
I really like that. I think it embraces so much of what's good and important about it as well.
Yes, and also it's that asynchronicity gives us some flexibility. And I also think, and this goes back to some of the stuff we were talking about in the What's Going On, it's also a reminder that even within that, there is flexibility. So yes, of course, there's text. We can, we've been sending emails and hopefully using them most of the time as asynchronous. Collaboration platforms, there's a lot of text, but also audio, there's sketching, there's video, there's screen capture. I was reading a book on Microsoft Teams this morning, and even though I always have mixed feelings about bringing the phone into any kind of work considerations, but let's face it works a lot of the time and it's good. They were saying, for example, you can take a picture on Microsoft Teams and then, of course, you can annotate it with your finger. So if you want to circle something, point an attention or an arrow, it's very easy to do. So it's quite fast. And then you can just put that on Teams.
That's really flexible, isn't it?
Yes.
That's bringing in different modes within the same communication. So I like that.
Yeah. And whether you want to bring phone in or not, maybe team members and you don't have a problem with that, and great. But it also starts to get you thinking that actually there are lots of different ways to communicate with each other, and different people have different preferences, and for different things we can use different things. Without it becoming overwhelming, it can actually enrich how we communicate.
Definitely. And how we can just really collaborate and do things together. You can do that so much more flexibly than having to be on a live call with somebody all the time.
Mm-hmm. And so what I've been, for how long can you think about this stuff and still go, oh yeah. And as well, and it's working with these companies that had never really used any of these tools or thought of communication in this way. I found that there's two aspects to asynchronous communication. I'll tell you what they are. One is the work-focused stuff. So it can help us to be aligned at work, know what we're doing and stuff. But for teams for whom that is not as important, and maybe they're traveling more, or like sales teams, and actually they don't need to know what other people are doing all the time. They're just getting on with stuff. It can actually provide the social space. So if we have something like Slack, something like Teams, we can use it to have work conversations, but we could also decide that actually the work conversations, we're going to have them in our real-time meetings because that's the best way. And we're going to use that just to have banter, celebrations, capture learnings, gossip, whatever it is, those little things. Oh, I just heard this. You put it in and you move on, talking of the phone. So I thought, I'd never quite thought of it as much for the social stuff, the asynchronous.
Yeah, it's just that kind of little sort of bits of social glue, I suppose, that connect people, whether it's a GIF or a joke or something that somebody else might find interesting, but it's not so relevant to the immediate work that you're collaborating on. It's very easy to share a link or something like that for people to come back to whenever it suits them. So I really like that idea.
Yeah, and doing it in a, I mean, we've always had them. There's also water cooler, Slack channels and stuff. But it really is that idea that what you're doing is you're capturing a moment and you're not just keeping it to yourself. And you're putting it there so that someone can grab it at some point. So it's also the thought and the why. So we're not just doing it out because it's nice to have a water cooler. No, it's because that helps us to connect. It helps us to not feel like we keeping things for ourselves or that we have to keep something for later. I think there's a whole psychological aspect to it that it's worth thinking about.
Yeah, definitely. And using it quite consciously as a way to deepen those connections, maybe.
Mm-hmm. And I think also one thing that's really being highlighted by the current transition is that we're fine with thinking that we can work away from each other in a physical distance kind of way, but there's a lot still of tendency to want to work within the same time frame. And I think that this way of working asynchronously, we can start to understand that teamwork is something that doesn't just happen when we are in the same time frame. That we have, and also it takes that responsibility all the way through our working day for the team. Not only when I'm with you, am I responsible to you and connecting to you, but actually all the way through. All my work is connected to you all the time, which for some might be horrible, but hey, that's a thought for those who want it.
Yeah, it's something to aspire to, definitely. And we looked, I think it was in the last podcast that we did together at the pyramid of remote work and the different levels. And I think that kind of unlocking from time is quite a high level thing, that when people get there, it's incredibly liberating to realize that you don't have to be connecting with people synchronously all the time, but that connection's there anyway. And, you can pick up on different elements of it as and when you need to, and you can actually get some work done as well.
Yes, it does have that. There is a productivity element to it. And thinking of that also, because one aspect is that, especially if you're not used to it, it could feel unnatural. Because of that, because these are some conversations that we're used to having in real time. At the same time, I think, well, we've always said this also, that it starts to level the playing field between people who think differently. Cognitive diversity. So I was reading for the first time, I hadn't read it yet, Remote, the Jason Fried and what's his name from Basecamp book. And something that I picked up there, they said it so well, was that meetings were a way of getting everyone thinking about something at the same time. And we know that some people find it easier to do that, to turn on that thinking about something. But if you've been working on different kinds of stuff, using one part of your brain in a certain way, and then suddenly you have to hop in a meeting and have this other kind of discussion, that might be really difficult. And also, I mean, it's not just even as a personality thing, but as a what's going on with your day thing, or even what physical place you are in. So I thought that was quite interesting from that point of view.
Definitely. And, I'm sure that being forced to experiment with different ways of doing things will change the way people work anyway. Actually, my brother-in-law was saying to me the other day, he's in a big educational establishment, and they used to have a monthly 4-hour meeting in person, bringing people together from different buildings and parts of the country. And he said he's realised they'll never, ever do that again. There's no way that they can justify that in terms of how much more productive it is to do it online, and that interrupt. And there's something very powerful about what Jason Fried said of making people think at the same time. I think there's something about that, even when you're in a different physical space, of everybody's brain doing the same thing at the same time. But it's almost so powerful that you ought to be very respectful of how you use it and how often. Yeah, to save it for the really important stuff.
Exactly. It goes back to that naked scientist thing. If you're going to do it, do it.
Yeah.
And if anything, I mean, this is the thing. I don't want anyone to be thinking that we're not advocating for people working together and having and working through a meeting and wherever that meeting is. But is this the best way of doing this question?
Yes. And it's unlikely that it's the best way of doing it at a fixed time every week or every month. It's much more important than that. So you could be so much more intentional about it when you're not booking a meeting room and booking transport and things like that. Think about what you actually need to achieve.
That's the thing. There's also flexibility in how you work together in real time, and I think that's not to lose that. And I think that's one of the things that has been lost in the transition. Sometimes the people who got it to the detriment, because something that I have seen, which I hope is not something that is transitioned to, as some of the companies keep the more working from home or remote aspect, is now that we know we can call a meeting for next day and we don't have to book a room, and we know where people are, so they're in front of the computer so they can attend that meeting. Let me send you a meeting invite at 5:30 and stick you as definitely coming for a meeting at 10 o'clock the next day. I've seen some of that. Or also a friend of mine said, yeah, my boss has decided we're having a meeting at 8:30 every morning. So I'm going off topic from our asynchronous communication, but let's not overdo the flexibility of the medium also, and stop being thoughtful.
And it is on topic, I think, because it is about kind of respecting the ways that we can work without having to do that to people, without having to control their time. And it's also about managing your own time and your schedule, which is obviously difficult if you're in a situation of working with a boss who says, right, it's 8:30, then you're kind of stuck with that. But I've been aware, having dared to try and take a week off last week and come back to, I think I had 5 meetings yesterday. Kind of more or less back to back, each of which results in a thing I have to write. And honestly, I wish I'd just I have since gone through and blocked off my schedule, because I thought I've got to have some time blocked out for completely asynchronous working this week. It's not safe to give your diary link out to people without more constraints on it than I'd already built in. So it is about owning that, and I know what I need in terms of flexible communication, and I have to communicate that a bit more deliberately.
So managers, if you're listening, Maya has been freelancing and working remotely in teams and in a company for how many years? And listen to what she says. So imagine people who are not used to having to manage their time and create boundaries in this way. Be very respectful and lead by example also, I think. I was wondering, so my friend who was saying she was basically completely drained from meetings and really desperately trying to get asynchronous communication to be incorporated. I think it was too fast. I think asynchronous is something you have to really build in and practice, experiment. And one of the things I said to her is be very strict with saying, do I need to be there? And be very fine with people. Actually, they might want you there, but if you don't know you can add value, don't. And lead by example in that way, and also make it very easy for people to say, no, I can't do that now, or can we do this a different way?
Yeah, and actually, if you attend an online meeting that you don't need to be at, it's bad for so many reasons. It's not just your time, but if there's a board meeting you might attend as an observer or something, you can sit quietly at the back and it doesn't impact on the meeting at all. But each person you add to an online call somehow increases the friction and noise and the time that it takes to do it. So you really, really shouldn't be there unless you need to. And if you don't need to be there synchronously, you can always get someone to record it for you.
Yes. If you just need to listen in, then that's an option, definitely. So we do have a book called Online Meetings That Matter that was written before this, and so if you do want to. If you are struggling with running online meetings for a while, or how they fit into your ecosystem and loads of other stuff, then grab that. So going back to when do we meet real time and when do we use the asynchronous, I think that clarity over flexibility is a really is a good question. Can I be clear with this? Then it's something that I don't need to be in real-time exploration with, or do I just need to be flexible? Do I need to say this now, and do I not need to bother anyone else? So I think that clarity over flexibility is an interesting one.
Yes, definitely. And it's about that intentionality and really thinking about the communication before you do it.
following from that, then also, even when you are, you need time to practice. This is why with my friend, I was like, okay, I'll give you some things, but actually, because if you start to think of things like, if you are using something like Microsoft Teams or Slack or whatever, you start to think, okay, this message, is this a new message or is it a thread? What section should it go? Is it task-based, which would mean I do the conversation in a certain way, or is it not? Is this conversation aimed at only one person, or is this something everyone should hear? So, and all of that, in order for it not to create more stress and work, you need to practice it, and it takes time.
Yeah, and you need to give yourself a break, actually, if you don't get it right first time. And, I think it's particularly at the moment where people have had to transition to this overnight. You won't necessarily create the right Slack channels the first time, or, the right Teams groups and things like that. So don't be afraid to say, oh, hang on a minute, I think we could organise this better now. We've actually run with it for a couple of weeks and this is working, but that bit isn't. So keep it under review.
And even if you have a team agreement, it doesn't mean that everyone always is going to know what to do and how to do it. Especially just things. Can I have a little mini rant for regular listeners, Maya, and any new ones who can sympathize about? Well, I've seen Slack being used like WhatsApp. So the use of threads, it's gone, and it's terrible because it means that you start to get like just people replying to other people in a message that was before, no nesting of conversations. And that comes from many people who were on WhatsApp having gone to Slack and not being onboarded. So
and not realising what's better about Slack.
Yes,
you don't
exactly.
have to communicate like that and shout over each other all the time.
It was a game changer. Remember when Slack introduced threads? It was like, wow, This is because Facebook has had it forever, and so has LinkedIn. So just mini rant, people. If you've just started on Slack, it's not WhatsApp. Okay, and then finally, I think, finally for me, is that because a lot of the asynchronous communication is text-based, and I think it will be mainly text-based in most places, just the nature of everything, although we encourage voice recordings and sketches and stuff like that too. But because a lot of it is written, I think there is still a formal relationship with writing in a business context. And so I think that many people struggle, for example, with just saying what they want to say and not thinking too much about whether the punctuation is great or whatever. But also, of course, the stress that comes with that from if I say in the wrong way, it's going to be read badly. So I think all of that just creates these psychological barriers that I'll just wait for that meeting that we've got scheduled instead of I need to say this now.
Yes, and I think it's something that it's easy to forget when you've been working in this environment for a while, or it's like the fact that you and I are both writers, so we're very, very comfortable with long-form written communication, but we're also very comfortable with each other to dictate something and just hit send, even if it's come out a bit wonky. And she'll know roughly what I mean, and we're not hung up about it being correct. Whereas people who are used to expressing themselves either very informally in a chat or a meeting, but then anything they write has so much more import. It's hard to transition that. So I don't know what can help people get over that. Probably just practice and just getting on with it.
And also, again, asking that question of, because I said this was my last point, but as you were talking, I was thinking there's also the whole, the fact that what you write stays as a record. So that also stops some people. So just think, is this something that I can say and I'm fine with it being there for ages? Or does it need to be an email because better record is more important? Remember that sometimes in these chat spaces and stuff, the messages might disappear at some point. So it's another layer of thinking of, does my message, is it okay that it's kept on record? Does it have to be a more permanent official record? Or actually this is something that I can only say in real time because I want the words to disappear after I say them.
Yeah, so that's a whole other thing, isn't it? Is how ephemeral is this? And does that mean I can say something I wouldn't want on record? Or do I need to run this Slack message past my solicitor first? Or, so don't overthink it.
Yes.
Otherwise, you will never do anything asynchronously.
Or the other thing is to put some thinking time aside to think about it, if possible, with the team, because this is a lot of the time when we're starting to think about this, and especially when I'm with teams actually, and I start talking about the team agreement and we need to think about all of this. Everyone always goes, "Isn't it common sense?" Well, yes, it is, but you don't want to wait until you have to think about it, because then it becomes too much.
Yes,
think
and
about
common
it now.
sense isn't common.
Yes.
In many circumstances. And also there's a kind of, it's a bit like the cultural naivety of people who've never met anyone from another culture. You think, well, common sense must be the same for everybody, and it's not. People think so differently and communicate so differently that, it might be common sense to you, but that doesn't mean it's the same for everybody else.
Yeah, good point. So anything you want to add to this before we wrap up, Maya?
Now, I think the most important thing about flexible communication is that, I think we've said this already, but I don't want the point to get lost, is that it's really good. The outcome is so much better for you, for the work, for your work-life balance, your productivity and your sanity. So it is really, really worth mastering this within your team and giving it a bit of time and attention and deliberation about how you want to communicate, trying things out, experimenting and moving on, because you will get so many benefits from it.
And I know we've said it before also, but I also want to highlight that we're not saying do this on its own, just in case, because there will also be people who, I've had this as well, like, no, this is something that helps you. And what we're saying is, if you haven't tried it, try it and incorporate it where it adds value, and use your other, the synchronous communication too. But the thing is, like with remote work, we have to bang on about it just so that it becomes an option.
That's what we do.
Exactly. We want it to be an option, and we think it's a very good option. So anyway, we are biased, but that is a very important thing to remember also, is bias and preferences. So I just want to say that we have this virtual teamwork guide for managers of remote teams, and of course for anyone who wants to read it. It will come out soon, people. And the way in which you can find out when it comes out is by signing up to our newsletter, which we only send once a month. We send that out once a month, but we do have our podcasts episodes coming out, well, at the moment every week, but if not every other week. So you can sign up to the newsletter via our website, which is virtualnotdistant.com. Remember, if you have made it to the end of the show, maybe you want to buy us a coffee. So we're trying this out. We're just seeing we create a lot of content, which, to be completely honest, is part of our marketing strategy. However, we also know that we're putting out so much content that we want to see if we can help our business develop with money we make from it. I'm just being really, really open here. So if you want to buy us a coffee because you enjoyed the episode, great. Maya, if no one buys us coffee, it doesn't matter. We'll carry on doing it because this is such a joy.
We'll go and make our own if we have to, yes. But we're quite thirsty after that little lot. And I think it's just a way of us being able to go on creating the content that you tell us you're enjoying. So, we have our services like consulting and training and workshops and so on. They're particularly suitable for some people and some teams. We have our books, which you can buy at any time. And this is just adding something new into that mix of a way of engaging with our content and rewarding us for it and helping us shape the kind of things that you want to be hearing.
Excellent. Well, listeners, there you go. We hope you enjoyed the episode. A big thank you for listening to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, produced by Virtual Not Distant. If you have something to add to the conversation, let us know through the contact form over at virtualnotdistant.com. I have been your host, Pilar Orti, and I'm signing off now. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.